So you talk about how we see the same story a fair number of times,
Yes.
but there's just always that one that stands out
Yeah.
despite something. What do you think it is that makes those stories different?
Yeah, I actually, so some people love books, some people love movies, but I actually think that where you are at in your life, you may need a particular story. And it was a narrative that you heard as a kid and you thought was bland, and you could have heard that same exact story as an adult and you got it at the right time, right? That's why we tell stories, is to help each other, to teach each other, hey, I've dealt with this hard problem, or I've dealt with here's a love story that might help you with your love life. And it's only when you're at that moment in your life that you're open to finding meaning in that special way. I watched the same movie over and over again, and Back to the Future, I said that was one of my favorite films. I still get something new out of it every time I watch it, because as I get older, I change, and so the meaning I take from it changes. And why I love the idea of having new ways of telling stories through technology is it means there's more opportunities to give that something to an audience, to help them learn something or help them grow or give them a new perspective. And that's how we all help each other through the human experience.
And going to what you're saying about using technology to retell the same story and trying to add something to it,
Yeah.
what are you looking for when you're doing that, or how do you know that you've?
I mean, you're looking to entertain. It's when you show something new to an audience, you know when that's happening. I think we're wired to want new. I think maybe that's why storytelling is such a good way to share new ideas. Because when we're entertained, it's like, oh wow, I've never seen it this way, or I've never experienced it this way, or I learned something new. And you know when people go into virtual reality, they come out of it and say, wow, I will remember that.
So is it mostly the wow factor, or is it more than that?
Well, I think the wow factor is important. Maybe you can call the wow factor a symptom of what's happening. You know, when people are blown away, it's because there's a part of their brain that's getting tickled that they've never had tickled before. And so it's good when people have a wow moment because you know you're connecting with that person. And I think that virtual reality is really important because you've never experienced being in reality that is fabricated. And I think that gives us the tools as storytellers to put you in space, to put you on Mars, or to put you inside a cartoon. And you can finally use the same parts of your brain that you do in the waking world to make sense of stuff that I think we only make sense of in our dreams. And I think that what's happening in virtual reality is people are using that same part of their mind that makes sense of dreams to make sense of this feeling of being somewhere else. Okay. And so that means that our brains are stimulated even more in virtual reality than any other medium.
But when you're creating a virtual reality piece, you have a couple of challenges that you don't have when you're maybe making a movie, and how it's a little bit more of a solitary thing and it's a little less of an accessible thing. Yes. How do you work with that?
I think it's part of the early days of this medium. In my talk, I said that we're making these shorts. We're telling narratives you've heard before, and we're still building the tools and the language. I think virtual reality will be a very social experience, but right now we're able to tell experiences for an individual. And we are working on experiences that you can have multiple people in at the same time. I think virtual reality right now has this limitation that it feels very solitary. But just like any technology or new way of telling story, we're going to figure out new ways that will bring back this feeling of it being social again.
Is that the idea that you would all put on a headset and see each other and the thing, or is that the idea that it would be less of a headset?
We can do this now with existing technology, where you could be in the same room and you're all wearing headsets, and where you are in the real world versus where you are in the virtual world can feel different. There's some really cool stuff happening in VR arcade space, where you go to a warehouse and everyone puts on these units that you wear, so you're not tethered to a machine, and you walk around together in a real space that is about the same as what you see in a virtual space. So you can go to a haunted house or a murder mystery in like a 1920s mansion, while in reality you're just walking around this big warehouse with these tracking sensors and everyone just has headsets on. I think that'll be really cool.
Yeah. Probably gives you opportunities to, again, go back to the same story in a different way.
Yeah, I think the replayability of story is amazing. The stories we told, Lost, Henry, and even Dear Angelica, are mostly linear. We do have a few moments where Henry can look at you in a special way, or we wait until you look in a particular direction to cue a particular moment. But eventually we're going to start creating stories where we'll do more than just have glances, where you can participate in more ways and have a role inside that. But it's going to take baby steps to get there, right? We need the time to figure this out. We need that time to tinker and experiment until we get to the thing that we say, that's a VR story.
Was your approach towards story maybe different, or did you come to it from a different angle, coming to Pixar more as the technical person?
Yeah. Pixar is an amazing place. And what I love there is there's not this hard line between you go in the engineering bucket, you go in the artist bucket. Everyone's working on the same film. And the idea is you just put people who are maybe more left brain and maybe more right brain, and then you'll find a way of telling a great story. And so while I was at Pixar, there was times I was writing code, and there was times I was making textures and painting. Now, I'm not as good as those people who went to four-year art school, but I was also doing these coding projects that required a creativity.
Were you planning on being that involved in the creative aspect and, coming to this place where you're talking about story when you got to Pixar?
Yeah, I knew about Pixar, and it was really cool when I was given a job offer there. But I was an engineer who was also looking at places like Microsoft and Google and Amazon. And I think the allure was, I'm going to go work at Pixar and get to work with people who are not like me. And I think that will make me a better engineer, but also a better professional. I'll be able to continue learning, because I came from an engineering school. And so I spent 4 years around these amazing engineers, but I wanted to be around amazing artists. And so for a lot of the beginning of Pixar, I was learning. I was just soaking it in. Like, how is a Pixar film made? I'm just here to contribute my craft and learn from the artists I'm working with. And then 10 years in, I felt like I was at a point where I wanted to find a new way. I wanted to find a technology that could really be a leap forward. And it was a really hard decision to leave, I have to say.
I think people probably appreciated hearing about that new way, and people have questions about that new way. And so people were really focused on the VR, but is there one thing in particular that you were hoping that people walked away from your talk with?
Yeah, for me, I want people to get curious about virtual reality. Right now, I think it's really important that we find new ways of telling story, but really, if I just left that seed to say, hey, this virtual reality thing is something that you should go see. If you're an audience member who goes to a movie or reads a book or loves something on television, if you love story, virtual reality is a medium you should look into. And I know that we're in the early days, and right now it requires a lot of technical know-how. It costs a lot of money to get into VR. But eventually, this is going to be much more accessible. And so this is planting the seed. So people are like, right, I heard about virtual reality. I remember going to TED Talk and seeing that. And so when it does come around and it is accessible to them, they'll be closer to making that leap. I'm originally from St. Louis, and I went to school on the East Coast and then went out to the West Coast because of Pixar, and I've been there ever since. But I'm really excited to bring this message to St. Louis. I think my mom was the first person in her neighborhood to have virtual reality, because I sent her the parts and she actually put the machine together and set up virtual reality. But my hope is that there's a concern that the East and West Coast knows about virtual reality and it's overhyped and everyone's been talking about it. And I'd really love to spread it beyond Silicon Valley